To go?
We're starting it up right now. Just one more moment.
Okay.
All right, and we're live.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening. It is Tuesday, March 13th, 2021. This is a regular meeting of the Policy and Services Committee. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Chair Ku,
Here.
Councilmember Stone,
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka, 2 present.
Okay, thank you so much. So first is oral communications on items that are not on the agenda. If there's anybody who is interested, please raise your hand. Will you help me, Danny?
Yes, of course.
Thank
If
you.
anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. We have one public speaker, Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg. You'll have 3 minutes on the timer. If you can unmute yourself.
Great. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight. And thank you for giving me 3 minutes so I don't have to be so crazed and get to speak a little more like a human being. So I am, as you know, I'm very interested in policies as a lawyer. And I guess I wanted to just ask you to consider a couple policies that I think could really use a upgrade. One of them is policy.
Miss Eisenberg?
Can you not hear me?
Yeah, you're fading in and out.
I'm sorry. I will try to go to a better location. I'm on my cell phone right now. Anyway, I'm hoping that you could give some more thought to working on accountability, transparency, and community participation. It's one thing to let us blah, blah, blah at these meetings, which, as you know, I take advantage of. It's a different thing to actually have our opinions count, or to get to vote on something, or to actually get questions answered. There is no back and forth between the community and leadership, except in the occasion where you appoint people to select committees. And obviously you don't really appoint me or any of my friends to those positions. So it's kind of, I hope you can understand, it's a little bit frustrating. So even if you were to allow us to turn on video so you could see us when we talk and we could see you, that would give our views, that would give us the opportunity to at least know that we're being heard, or at least being listened to. So that's number one. Number two is, I'm really hoping that you all can work a little harder on living the values. We all just recently, we've been as a community, as a state, as a country, as a world, are going through a real crisis in terms of discrimination and violence against just about every minority group, whether it's Asian Americans or African Americans, Jews, Muslims, women. We're in a bad time, maybe made worse by this pandemic. You all have passed a number of really great initiatives, or at least statements on these issues, and I applaud you for that, and I support them wholeheartedly. What I'm hoping, though, is that you all could work a little harder on living those values. For example, making sure that there's a Muslim or a Jewish person, or woman, Asian American, etc., appointed to each of these committees that you appoint, an African American. There's really not a lot of that, and I'm hoping that in the spirit of us all working together amicably, you all could just kind of do that a little more. Thanks so much for considering. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is a dial-in caller ending in 917. I've just allowed you to speak. If you could unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes for public comment.
Hi, this is Winter Dellenbach. I don't usually call in by phone, but I've tried 2 different ways to join the meeting: by video, by going to your agenda at the city website, And then also I get that your agenda was, I did it through the city council agenda. You're listed and I tried it that way. There's no way I can join the meeting. I join meetings by video all the time, like city council last night, but it doesn't seem to be a live link. So I'm just informing you of that. That's not what my public comment is, but there you go. I sure wish I could join it by video. I don't know if other people are having that problem, but here's what I want to say. This is not on the agenda. You are doing some audit stuff. This is a different audit. I wanted to just let you know that it has been at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years, since Policy and Services has had, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the code enforcement audit in front of you. It's to come to you yearly, just like other audits do, and then go to City Council. And it's just been disappeared. And I mentioned this to the city manager, believe it or not, at the City Council retreat, not this year's City Council retreat, but the year before that, when it could be done in person. And I mentioned it to him and he said, oh my goodness, I guess it just got lost in the sauce. So the code enforcement audit that Harriet Richardson, she did when she was still here, oversaw, had it done, and it was a major audit, and I believe it went to Policy and Services once, and then that was it. And unlike these other audits that go on and the benchmarks to check how the progress is being made, and none of it's being done. That audit is just stopped. So I'm telling you folks that you're not seeing an audit that was done that's supposed to come before you. And I'm not sure what to do about it at this point. So now you know too. I wish somebody would look into it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Winter-Dellenbach. We'll also look into the Zoom link that you've mentioned as well. And there are no other speakers.
Thank you. So we'll close oral communications and go on to our action items for tonight. The first one is discussion and recommendation to the City Council to accept the City Auditor's quarterly status report for Q3 of the fiscal year 2021 and approve additional task orders for approved audit activities. Did I get that right? Q3 of 2021?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's Q3 of the fiscal year. But good evening, Ms. Koo, and distinguished members of the Policy and Service Committee, staff, as well as the members of the public that are on. It's a pleasure to be before you again this evening. It is indeed the quarterly status report for the quarter that ended 3/31, which would be Q3 of the current fiscal year, Q1 of the calendar year. So apologies if that causes any confusion. And it's my second quarterly status report, so even more confusing. Today we're going to cover the quarterly status report. This is your second time seeing this, so it might not appear maybe as memorable, but you'll start to get familiar with the quarterly status report that I plan on providing moving forward. And in addition, at our last meeting, you approved the audit plan, which included a number of audit activities. You also approved a series of task orders to conduct those audit activities. And tonight we're asking for approval of 2 additional task orders that align to our audit plan. So you've already approved the plan. We're just asking Baker Tilly, that is, for contractual approval to actually execute those projects. We'll get there in a minute. I'm happy to take questions as we go through this presentation today, but also we'll have some time reserved at the end for questions, of course. So beginning with our status report covering the period January through March. And this is sort of a recurring slide. These are the tasks that are actually outlined in our contract with the city. And as you'll see on the next slide, we'll go through our progress on each of these items. So the citywide risk assessment was approved by council in March and previously by Policy and Services in February. Same with the audit plan, was approved at the same meetings and fully approved by council on March 1st. The city auditor has a role in the annual financial audit, so your external audit that's conducted by MGO. The single audit was presented to the Finance Committee last week and will actually be presented to council on a consent agenda in May. That single audit actually was the last of 6 audit reports that the financial auditors conduct each year. And so their activities for FY21 will be completed should that report be accepted on consent in May. Additionally, we worked through a 1-year contract extension to extend MGO, your external financial auditors. And that extension was actually approved last night by the City Council. That item was on consent agenda. So MGO will be conducting the FY21 audit as well. Task 4 is actual execution of the audit plan. So if you were to approve the task orders that are being presented tonight, a total of 10 task orders would be approved in total. 7 audit activities, so 7 of the 8 previously approved task orders are actually currently in progress. And of course, today we're asking for 2 additional task orders to be approved. We'll get to those here shortly. Task 5 has a variety of tasks, including periodic reporting, monitoring the hotline, and administrative tasks. Over the past quarter, we've reviewed a couple of hotline reports. I have another slide on that coming up here shortly. And in addition, we're presenting that Q3 quarterly report today. And finally, Task 6 is an evaluation of the city audit function by a third party, and we're in the preliminary phases of planning that. That external evaluation actually will not be undertaken until the end of our 2nd year of our contract. So we're still a little over a year away from that. I went through the tasks in progress relatively quickly. I'm going to keep rolling, but feel free to jump in with any questions. So this slide is intended to give you just a snapshot of projects in progress and reports that we've issued. We've issued 2 reports, the risk assessment report and the audit plan report, both of which were fully approved by council in March. And we have 7 projects that are currently in progress, and I call projects audit activities. If you were to approve the 2 additional task orders, that would mean we have 3 projects pending kickoff. So 7 underway currently with 3 additional that are approved and ready to kick off in the coming months. So what are those audit activities? The 2 we're asking for approval today are 4.9 and 4.10. So we're requesting approval of those. The 8, 4.1 through 4.8 prior to that were previously approved as part of our last presentation, and the bolded audit activities are currently underway. So those are the 7 audit activities we are currently conducting. Just to give you a bit of an update on progress, we're still in the early stages of conducting those audit activities. They were approved on March 1st. Then we went through the process of actually signing the task orders, which Ms. Koo, you are responsible for that, which takes a few days. And so really we're about 3 to 4 weeks into each of these projects. I'm certain that each of you are anxiously awaiting to hear audit results. Don't have any to report today, anything official, but I want you to know that each of them are underway and we are on track and on plan as budgeted for. I mentioned earlier that we, as part of Task 5, monitor the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. In our prior period, we had reported that we had received 1 report, and it was actually open at that point, so it was not closed as it is now. And in the prior quarter, we received another hotline complaint. Since that time, both of those complaints have been closed. Both of those reports were they weren't issues of fraud, waste, and abuse, but rather were matters for the human resource function to handle. So we referred that work to the human resource folks to handle, and close those reports out. And when I say we, it's the committee that handles these sorts of complaints, which is the city manager, the city attorney, and myself. So I will pause there. Do you have any questions before I move on to the 2 task orders we'd like to ask approval for today?
Any questions? Councilmember Stone, Tanaka? It doesn't look like it. Please
Okay,
proceed.
and of course, great. So just a kind of a thought back to our audit plan. So as you may recall, we sort of separated our audit activities into 3 phases. Phase 1 were audit activities that would be completed within this fiscal year. Phase 3 were audit activities that would be completed next fiscal year. And phase 2 were audit activities that would be completed next year, but would commence this year. So sort of cross between fiscal years. This is somewhat meaningful in the sense that it gets you familiar with the timeline in which these audits will be completed. Somewhat not all that meaningful in the sense that the phases really don't make much of a difference other than when the work will be completed. With that said, many of the audit activities that were previously approved were in that phase 1 category. We of course needed approval of those to get going quickly. The 2 task orders that we're asking for approval today fall within the phase 2 category. So they're work that will commence this fiscal year, but be completed next fiscal year. And those 2 audit activities are on your screen now. So again, these are within phase 2. The first audit activity is a building permit and inspection process review. Within this project, we are, so that sounds like a broad title. Our first step in this project will be to conduct what I would call a project specific risk assessment. So we'll identify specific permit types or categories that are high risk or in need of re-engineering. And then we'll go through a process of evaluating efficiency, effectiveness, benchmarking against like organizations, and offering recommendations not only to improve the process, but also to improve controls as well. The second project we are asking for approval of the task order is a nonprofit agreement risk management review. So essentially we're looking at controls that are in place and processes that are in place to manage our nonprofit agreements from selection throughout the life of the agreement. We're going to assess some of the performance against best practice. And in addition, we're going to follow up on some work that was completed a few years back and make sure that corrective actions that were recommended, I believe that work was 3 to 4 years ago, have been implemented. Those task orders are in the policy and services packet, so you're able to review those in whole. So this is just a snapshot. And our action tonight is there's 2 items. The first of which is to accept our quarterly status report, and the second of which is to offer approval of those task orders. If you were to do that, this item would then go to City Council for consent in early May. And I will pause again for questions, thoughts.
Council colleagues, you have questions or comments or move the agenda item?
I have. Sorry, is that the end of the presentation?
It is, yes.
Okay. Sorry, Chair Koo, can I ask my question?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Hi, Kyle, good to see you again. You mentioned on the last, can we go back to the last slide real quick? Sorry, go back another one. There we go. On nonprofit agreement risk management, the last bullet, you say follow up on relevant audit findings from past audit work. So we do have audits that have focused on this issue in the past.
That's correct. So there was an audit activity conducted by one of the prior auditors in the last 3 to 4 years. And part of the audit activity here will be to follow up to ensure that corrective actions that were recommended at that time were indeed implemented. So yes, okay, is the short answer.
And are we staff able to forward us a copy of that of that audit report. I'd be curious to see what the findings were there, because I think it's relevant to some of the work that we'll be doing with nonprofits in the coming months.
So I definitely can forward you a link. It should be posted. I maybe in the last couple of days haven't looked to see where they're located on the new site, but I'll find it and send it to you, Mr. Stone.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A few other questions. What are some examples of the type of audit performed for the nonprofit agreement risk review? Can you just kind of give us some examples of the type of things that you're considering doing with that?
Yes. So, we want to look at the full life cycle of nonprofit agreements. So, the first step in that process will be sort of selection and onboarding of new nonprofits. So taking a look at the city's process for evaluating, those organizations, whether or not they will represent the city well, and sort of the selection process to identify those folks and the internal controls in place. So selection and onboarding is part of the review. Actually delivering services, there's a variety of nonprofits, but I would say generally how those contracts or agreements are managed day to day, how we're monitoring performance, how are we ensuring that those folks are delivering on what they say they would and what they're contractually bound to do, programmatically as well as financially, and really assessing how we're tracking performance throughout the life of those agreements.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. I know at the end of the report talks about your plan for the 2 audits to travel out to Palo Alto to interview people. And this is not to say I don't want to see you in person, Kyle, because I'd like to meet you. But I'm wondering, just because the expenses associated with it are not minimal. I mean, is there a reason why these can't be done over Zoom or by phone? Is there a real particular reason why these need to be done in person? And I understand the report does say if COVID restrictions are still in place, then you would not need to do, then you wouldn't do it. But kind of wondering, just kind of moving forward, best ways to just kind of save money and whether we can save money by doing some of these things over Zoom in the future.
Short answer, we absolutely can. It's not imperative that we do this in person. And to some extent, some of the budget is reserved for, essentially for us to be present and present results, which I know the city isn't planning on opening its doors, at least in the next several months. So short answer, yes, we absolutely can avoid the travel costs that are potentially budgeted for by conducting audit work remotely. And to be honest, when we're putting this together, every week this changes, and I think we drafted these task orders 2-3 weeks ago at this point. To some extent, it's a shot in the dark as to whether or not we will be traveling, when we'll be traveling. So we're kind of using our best guess, but we can absolutely conduct the work remotely. We've been doing it now for a year. I've been stuck in this room for 12 months, as you've seen.
Yeah. And just kind of a clarification on that, would the 3 anticipated trips, is a little unclear in the report, would the 3 anticipated trips be for both proposed audits combined, or are those separate? So you're anticipating 6 total trips?
So they would be separate. So for each of these projects, what we do, and this is true not only for these 2, but the other 8 that you've already approved, we assign a project team. So the project team will likely be different for each of these. So they would be discrete, separate trips. That is correct. So these budgets are separate, and there is a reimbursable expense category to each of these task orders, and they are indeed discrete.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Those are the questions I have, Chair.
Awesome. Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So I think good report. Thank you. Seems to make sense. A few quick questions. I know that I think the city manager is planning to roll out kind of a net promoter score type system to survey how people's experience has been. Is this going to be able to incorporate some of that, or are you guys going to be able to use any of that as part of your audit?
So if there's data that exists, we'd certainly want to incorporate it. I don't envision that we would be specifically helping roll out the Net Promoter Score, but I would say with the building permit project, we do indeed intend on gathering data from customers through sort of a survey of our own. Could potentially be more of a focus group type of situation rather than a statistically representative survey, but we do want to gauge input from the community on the permit types that we land on within that risk assessment process and ensure that we understand, kind of community or customer input.
Okay, I think getting that firsthand account is actually really important. So I'm glad you guys are doing that. And maybe you guys do both. You do kind of a random sample as well as maybe, I'm not sure if focus group makes sense because focus groups are really great when, the new product, trying to discuss a new product or something like that. But I think this one is, people may be more and more open to share, their issues privately over the phone versus, or over Zoom versus in front of other people. But I don't know, I'm sure you have that figured out.
And I actually agree with that. The question sometimes is whether or not a, seemingly random person who isn't directly employed by the city reaching out, if we get sort of good responses from that sort of outreach. I would anticipate that we would, and I don't see any reason specifically for Palo Alto that we wouldn't, but in other cases we've struggled. So
I could tell you, people's complaint about the building department is quite frequent from my office hours. So I think, and I usually do a Facebook Live of them too. So you're welcome to, if you want to go back to look at my Facebook Live, you could actually watch some of those sessions, but they're quite frequent. People are quite vocal about it. So, yeah, but anyways, it's something which is probably good for you to hear some of the issues that people have about it. Okay, and what again was the issue with the frayed waste? You said there was one issue, but what was the nature of it?
Oh, the fraud, waste, and abuse. It was an employee safety concern that was expressed. Essentially we pointed out or gave the details to human resources folks, and they did some outreach and also kind of took a look at policy enhancement.
Okay, so it's been rectified then? Correct,
yes.
Okay, good. Okay, great. And then, yeah, I also have to agree with Councilmember Stone, and you guys probably actually also prefer not to have to fly as well. But I think if we can do it remotely, I think we should. Just, we're kind of in tight times right now for the city. And so if we could, it would save you guys family time as well, but it would also save the city some money. So if you think it could be as effective, I think I'm with Councilmember Stone on this. I think it's a good idea and good recommendation. So just want to support him on that. But thank you.
Okay. And I don't know if this is appropriate time to make this comment, but certainly are aware of the position the city's in, and I'm anticipating that there will be questions around the budget, city audit budget, and we're prepared to play our part in kind of helping with the the budget crisis that the city's sort of in. So just know, I guess, that when those questions start coming up over the next couple of months during the budget season, we'll be looking at ways that we can identify cost savings and play our part.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. I wanted to say thank you for the questions because to my colleagues, basically, they asked a lot of the same questions that I had. One question regarding the new task that hasn't been signed yet, which is task order audit activity 4.9. So I'm noticing that the total task order price is the same as the one for task audit activity 4.10. So I'm sorry, not the total task order price. It's the balance remaining in master agreement contract. So does that not change? Can you explain to me?
So I find that to be a little bit confusing myself, but essentially that item, which is number 4 on the cover page of each task order for those that are trying to locate it, that amount is the same on each of these task orders, and it actually equals our total master contract amount minus what we've billed to date. So somewhat meaningful, somewhat confusing, but that's kind of, I guess, how that's derived.
Okay.
And
Okay, I mean, that's my, that was just the one confusion that I had, but thank you for clarifying. Now, the other thing is what my colleagues asked about traveling out here. For that specific task, I'm certain there are certain tasks that you really don't have to come out. It can be done through virtual. Is there a need to come out to walk the site or to do something just to have a visual, or you know, why was it necessitated for you to come out? Or is that for the reporting to council?
So definitely reporting is part of that on the back end of each of these projects. Specifically for the building permit process review, we actually do like to do sort of a walkthrough of the physical site and sort of kind of gain the customer experience. I would say, with that said, we have gotten creative over the past year and had folks do a variety of things like walk around with their phone to show us how things work. But also the customer experience has totally changed. So, you know, it's not necessarily that the customers are coming into all locations, and they can do a lot remotely. So we do like to see the site, but it's not imperative, I guess, that would be my response for the first project. For the second item, typically for these types of projects, we like to conduct a review of documentation on site. So when we're requesting agreements, potentially looking at transaction level data and invoices from nonprofit entities, sometimes it's easier just to provide that information to us in person. And also conducting interviews is sometimes easier in person. Again, with that said, we can do most of that work remotely these days. And many of those documents are available electronically, or should be at this point.
Obviously, please go ahead.
So I think we can get away without being on site for those projects. And, you know, because these are in that phase 2 category, we plan on kicking these off in May once these are fully approved by council. The activities will extend into next fiscal year, likely into early fall. I know that the dates on here we've extended a little bit beyond what we anticipate delivering, but into early fall. So hypothetically, the world opens up back then, we'd like to get on site, but to the overarching question, it's not imperative.
Right. So I think that if that could be part of the consideration of when you do travel, is that it is imperative in order to be on site for some reason, then just for consideration. Otherwise, I think my colleagues are correct in terms of our budget and so forth. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. One thing I would mention, and I'm not sure if, so for my travel personally, I know this is now 6-8 months ago, when we talked about, you know, me being on site personally, we talked about, you know, there being sort of a 1 to 2 week a month in the back of our mind goal. You know, it's not in our contract, but there being that sort of a goal. And I do embed some of those travel costs within projects themselves. So there is that aspect. Now, if there's, you know, maybe less of a goal, or maybe the city itself might not be fully in person, or we'll have some sort of hybrid environment, maybe that lessens the necessity for me personally to be on site as frequently as anticipated. I suppose that's another consideration. So what I've done thus far is essentially budgeted myself in each of these projects that you're seeing today to be one of the trips that we're talking about. So
that's good to know.
That's an element to it. Again, over this period of time, it's not going to be, I'm not going to be traveling. So maybe less of a concern and a topic of discussion over time as we go back to whatever our new normal is.
Okay. If there's no more other comments, then could I ask for a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll
Staff
second.
recommendation.
Thank you. And that is to accept the city auditor's quarterly status report and to approve the additional task orders for approved audit activities. Will
Chair,
you?
Fu?
Yes.
Let's see, I believe, I'm not sure if you took public testimony on this item yet.
Okay. Thank you for the reminder.
Good thing.
So we'll hold. Danny, will you help, please?
Yes, of course. If anyone from the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. And I do want to note that the agenda is now updated to include the Policy and Services Zoom meeting information.
Ms. Eisenberg, please.
Um,
I'm sorry.
yes, it seems that Ms. Eisenberg, although she had her hand raised, she had left the meeting. And as of now, there are no public speakers.
Okay, very good. So could you call for the vote, Ms. Kang?
Yes, of course. Chair Koo,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
This motion passed unanimously.
Thank you. So we'll move to our second agenda item, City Council's referral to the Policy and Services Committee, consideration of rent forgiveness for city tenants in an amount not to exceed the city's council COVID-19 reserve. Do we have a presentation, City Manager? Or Ms. Gaines?
Mr. Weaver will be making the presentation today.
Hello, Mr. Weaver. Thank you.
Hello. Let's see if I could share my screen here. Good evening, council members, Chair Koo, Councilmember Greer, Councilmember Tanaka, staff, and public. Tonight, we are presenting the consideration of rent forgiveness for city tenants. This rent forgiveness program was directed from the March 1st, 2021 City Council meeting. At this meeting, City Council approved rent forgiveness for our nonprofit tenants, which was option C. The option C provided rent forgiveness for active and non-operational nonprofit tenants that had an impact cost up to $203,000. Based on the not to exceed balance of the COVID-19 Council Reserve, staff expects the impact of this cost to be up to $541,000. In consideration for this program, staff excluded operational tenants such as cell towers and ground leases. Based on the public comment from the March 1st meeting, staff decided to remove the revenue restrictions for this program. This program is created for our not-for-profit tenants and those nonprofit tenants who did not qualify for the nonprofit program based on gross revenue. A new addition to the qualifications is requiring an active business registry certificate. Per the city's municipal code, all businesses located within the city must have an active business registry certificate. The qualifications you see here are as the same as their approved nonprofit forgiveness program, except the addition of the business registry and the removal of the revenue restrictions. If a business is not registered or active at the time of application, staff can assist in renewal or registration process. Staff previously assisted small businesses during the Small Business Grant Program. Here are the three options of consideration for this rent forgiveness program. Option 1. This option would provide rent forgiveness for up to 3 months and not to exceed $50,000 per tenant. The amount will be determined through a pro rata approach. The pro rata approach uses the monthly rent divided by the total monthly rent to get a percentage, which is then multiplied by the estimated impact cost. Option 2, this program This option would actually be similar to option 1 in providing rent forgiveness for up to 3 months and not to exceed $50,000 per tenant. The difference between option 1 and option 2 is the review of the financial statements of the entire year instead of 6 months. The idea behind this approach would be a more thorough analysis related to COVID-19 impacts on our tenants. Tenants would be required to demonstrate a minimum of 50% loss in revenue between the years of 2019 and 2020. And option 3, this option would not provide rent forgiveness to our tenants that did not qualify under the first program. The county eviction moratorium has been continued multiple times throughout 2020 and is scheduled to expire in June 30th, 2021. The eviction moratorium can be extended further into 2021. By delaying the rent forgiveness program until the eviction moratorium expires, staff may receive assistance or guidance from the state or other agencies in helping tenants. Staff has created a matrix of the pros and cons for each option. As you can see here, there are positives and challenges with any of these options. Staff is seeking committee's guidance on preference for recommendation to the full council. And lastly, staff recommends that the Policy Service Committee recommend to the City Council for consideration the creation of a rent forgiveness program for city tenants who were not forgiven 3 months of rent by City Council on March 1st, up to 3 months and not to exceed $50,000 per tenant. And that's all I had. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Council members, if you have a question, please go ahead and unmute. I don't see the hands. Councilmember Tanaka, Councilmember Stone. Go ahead.
You have to take public comment first. There's a hand raised on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I forgot again. Ms. Kang, will you open it up for public comments?
Thank you. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item 2, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press star 9. We have Miss Rebecca Eisenberg followed by Lee Fab. Ms. Eisenberg, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes for public comment.
Thank you so much. I also had my hand raised for the first item, but then I was kicked offline just when it happened. So I asked for an extra minute. Otherwise, I'll just try to be fast. Okay, so as to this measure, I was at the city council meeting, in fact, every meeting talking about this program. And I do not believe it's accurate to say that the public wanted the lifting of the $2.5 billion revenue threshold. I think if anything, maybe that threshold should be raised a little bit, like 10 million. And quite frankly, you can raise it to 100 million because there's no way that Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint should be treated the same as a child care center. It's just absurd, guys. You all know how to tell the difference between a company that's a small business and a company that's a mega conglomerate that pays its CEOs $30 million. So I really think you need to exercise some common sense. Also come in handy when you look at the business tax. You know, you can actually have a tax that taxes companies that are only bigger than 500 employees and make more than $300 million, in $300 million in annual revenues. Those are bright lines you can make. And so in this case, it's just clear that you need to help the companies that need it and not help the companies that don't. I wanted to also speak really, really briefly to the audit. And that's to say that there's nowhere that people can find that phone number that supposedly only got 2 calls. It's just, I've looked for it, and now with the redesign, I can't find it. It's even harder to find. So I think if you're actually going to have an accurate representation of how many people use that hotline, you got to publicize it. Secondly, I want to remind you all that code enforcement is actually a profitable venture. I know that you're talking about the cost of bringing someone in locally, and I agree that it's costly, which is why I still insist that you should be doing, the using internal people to do your audits rather than an outsourced firm. I mean, studies unanimously show that nothing good comes, no actual auditing comes from the hiring of an outsourcer like you're using, which is actually what we're seeing is no actual audit responses. If you go look on the website, I don't know how to find it now, but in the past, there was a list of literally like 50 audits that the auditing department had done in the past in Palo Alto, including the one that you referenced. You can see how often audits used to be forthcoming, like several a month. Like in fact, at a couple times, a couple of a week. That's the rate it should be happening. Anyway, you can't do code enforcement. But I remind you, code enforcement, when it comes to the assessment of code penalties, as you guys may not be aware, but it actually provides for $500 per violation per day. So that's why when Castellea continues to be in violation of its conditional use permit, when it had 40 students over, they were supposed to be charged for, let me just finish, 40 times $500 times each day in violation. San Francisco actually brings in $1 billion a year in code enforcement. Code enforcement is not an expense, it's a revenue source. I really want you to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lee Fab. I have unmuted. If you can unmute yourself, you'll
Hi,
have 3
I'm
minutes.
Lee Fab. I am representing Palo Alto Community Child Care. PAC is an honored member of the partnership with the city, and we thank you for all the support that you have given us through this year. Just like other small businesses in Palo Alto, nonprofits have kept their doors open to serve the community's immediate needs during these unprecedented last 13 months. PAC is proud to have served essential workers and their children during this pandemic. We have been true to our mission, our vision, our values, and to our community. Yet the pandemic demolished the revenue streams needed to cover operational costs, especially retaining exceptionally strong early childhood educators. PAC's even liquidated many of its reserves and will not be able to balance its operation budget this year. I'm now confused because I heard in your presentation that there was rent forgiveness approved, but I was not aware of that when I came into the meeting tonight. We are requesting that the committee supports the economic recovery of PAC and the other nonprofits by providing rental forgiveness. These forgivenesses will allow nonprofits like PAC to be sustainable and serve our community in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And we have no other speakers, Chair Koo.
Thank you so much. Questions? I think Councilmember Stone, you had unmuted before we went to oral communications.
Yes, I do. Unless I spoke last time first, so if Councilmember Tanaka would like to go first, that's fine.
That's fine.
I could if you want. Otherwise, if you want to go first, you're welcome to.
No, please, Councilmember Tanaka.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll give some of my thoughts on this, and I'll love to hear you guys' thoughts on this too. But I guess for me, it's something which we should think about. Like for each organization, how many of the people they serve is actually here in Palo Alto? Because I think that should be a factor in terms of how much forgiveness there is. Because the ones that serve the city, serve a lot of the residents of the city more, maybe should get more. The ones that get less, get less. Now I realize that's harder because you guys may not know that. But I ask them, and how do we audit that? I get all of that, but that's just one thing I was thinking about, just in terms of trying to maximize. Because I'm sure we have a limited amount of dollars for this program, so we probably can't. And some of them have bigger impact for our community than others. So that's something which I think we have to think about a bit. The second thing is, and so this is something which I'd like to hear from my colleagues here in terms of what you guys think about this idea. And then the second thing is, how do we, I don't think this was accounted for in our budget. So where does the money come from that's going to help fund this? And so I don't know if staff could answer that. I don't know if Ed or someone who knows about the finances can answer that question. Oh, Kylie, there you are. Yeah.
Sure, I can take this. So the council had set aside, if you recall, City Council COVID-19 reserve in the 2021 adopted budget. And so that reserve was set aside for anything the council designated as a need over the course of the coming fiscal year. So the current recommendation from the City Council is that the PNS look at programs that would up to exhausting that reserve, which is 744,000 for this program. So this would allocate those reserve funds.
Okay. Okay. And what's the total amount that's left in right now?
So the total reserve was $744,000. The council's already approved a rent forgiveness program for nonprofit tenants, which is approximately $203,000. Did I get that right, Jeff? Great, thank you. So the potential remaining is that $500,000.
Okay. And this is eligible to just Coverly or all?
Go ahead, Mr. Weaver.
This is eligible for all.
Okay. And okay. Actually, I'd love to get your response in terms of, is there a way for us to find out like how much of the people are being served by that organization in our city?
Mr. Weaver?
Yeah, that was definitely a consideration to ask that information, because that's something that we don't have on hand, but we felt that it was a little difficult to determine exactly how do we weigh, maybe a small business that maybe only has room for, 20 tenants. And let's say out of the 20, there's half, so 10, that's 50%. But then someone else who, let's say, has a larger capacity, can account for more. So how do I determine, a dollar value or a specific number? For
Well,
that?
I was thinking about by percentage, but I was just wondering whether people can give or represent, that this is what percentage of the people that they serve is in Palo Alto. But do you actually have that data? Did you get that from people or not yet?
That's data that I don't have, but going to that point as well, if you give a percentage, if let's say certain businesses don't have the information handy and information is not readily available, and they have to, let's say, come up with a number, I think there's some validation kind of consideration, whether I'm checking addresses or zip codes, whatever that information is. But I believe maybe that is something that we can ask during the application process, so that way we have that data for future considerations.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo. What does it mean? And so in column 3 on that table at the end of the staff report, what does it mean when it says operations not restricted? Does that mean that those companies would not be considered within the rent forgiveness?
Sorry, which slide was that? Sorry about that.
It's not on the slide. It's in the staff report on page 21 of the packet. It's attachment 2A.
It's the list of all the companies, the Bay Area Cellular Telephone Company, GTE MobileNet. Those are all the operations not restricted.
Sure. So the program eligibility, the way we kind of determine the list. So the operations not restricted. Yeah, we considered example in this situation. It was a lot of cell towers. It was ground leases. These operations we felt weren't restricted by the public health orders. The operation of the cell towers were still ongoing. We felt like that didn't impact their business or their operations.
Okay, so the only businesses that we're considering this for are the ones listed in the program eligibility as for-profit forgiveness, correct?
Correct. And also part of this program too, and related to their first approval was, for example, PAC. PAC is a nonprofit. They stated during public comment that they make their revenues gross more than 2.5 million. So in that consideration, they technically wouldn't qualify for the first program, but we do want to consider and help them. So in this example, for this program, we would ask them to apply for this program, and then potentially we could help them with up to 3 months or $50,000.
Okay, but so like the idea that we're not, just to make clear, because I know this was mentioned in public comment, and I think a reasonable concern, but just to make clear, we're not suggesting providing assistance to some of these large conglomerates, as some have mentioned.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So, one clarification, Councilmember Stone, it is the committee's prerogative, if you so choose, to offer rent forgiveness for all of the city's tenants. However, based on the prior direction from the council about impacts of COVID-19, staff did take a preemptive scan to look at those that were more impacted by the shelter-in-place orders than others. And this also allowed us to bring forward the recommendation, which would allow the limited dollars to go further.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate it. I think where you cut it off makes perfect sense, and I would not be suggesting to give rent forgiveness to some of these companies. So thanks, Kylie. Couple more questions. Why does staff? One thing I was curious about: why does staff believe option 2 is the easiest to administer? Because it seems like option 1 is the simplest, given it doesn't require staff to analyze financial statements. But the staff report said that option 2 is the easier one.
Sorry, I realized that was a typo. So yeah, option 2 is not the easier one. The fastest, quickest option would be option 1.
Okay.
Option 2 is just more of a thorough process, and it would take a longer time. So yeah, sorry, that was a mistype.
Not a problem. And then just to be clear, so under option 2, tenants who have lost revenue greater than 50% would be eligible for total rent forgiveness for 3 months, as long as the rent forgiveness is under $50,000, the total rent forgiveness for those 3 months.
I think it would just depend on the applicants that do apply. I think based on the dollars that we have available, we could potentially provide almost 3 months in certain situations, but if certain tenants don't apply, then depending on the bottom line or the number, we could be close to exactly 3 months, or 50,
okay,
up to 50,000. That is correct.
And so staff's thought would not be to increase the number of months of rent forgiveness, but instead, if we had that situation, instead would be to increase the dollar amount over the course of the 3 months.
Staff was considering just 3 months as the cap, just because that was the same situation that we offered to our nonprofits, so we didn't want to exceed that. And the $50,000 amount in the report, we only have a few tenants that exceed that amount that would be given. So that's the consideration for both of those.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I mean, definitely. Thank you to staff for taking our recommendations in the council meeting and bringing this back to us. I think you've done a great job with your recommendations. I'm definitely in favor of option 2. I was hoping it was going to be the easier one for staff to administer, but it doesn't seem like it. But it does seem to be the most thorough option. Seems to be the most fair, especially when funding is so tight these days, and we want to make sure that we're able to do the most with what we can. It just makes the most sense to me to really be focusing in on what businesses in the city are truly struggling as a result of the pandemic. And option 1, I just didn't feel went there. I mean, I understand I understand the option and the interest by staff, but I think option 2 is really what we're hoping to get to. So I'll be supporting option 2 tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Weaver, I have a question. You mentioned for the third option that is no rent forgiveness. Then you went into some of the reasons that potentially if the opening period is extended, or then can you say that again, just so that I understand that perhaps there might be more money coming in?
Yeah, it's just, Palo Alto right now, we are definitely ahead of the curve compared to some of our other cities. When we were doing our initial research back in October, no one really had a program developed there was a lot of different loan programs that kind of came out in between the time from counties. So the eviction moratorium, essentially what it provides is if it expires June 30th, as expected, tenants who fall under that moratorium would have 6 months to pay 50% of the rent that's been owed, and then they would have a full year from the expiration to pay the entire amount. But what we've seen and what we've seen trending is, the eviction moratorium has been moved either by the state or the county at least 3 or 4 times, and the expectation of it being moved further could be on the horizon, just because we've seen that trend. And we're starting to see some other counties and some other cities come up with different grant programs to provide for their tenants. So we were thinking, if we waited somehow, there'd be maybe some more information, maybe there's some additional funding, maybe by the state, because as of right now, we just don't see that available.
And so could we still grant this round of rent forgiveness? And then if that should happen, can we still apply for those grants that come out later?
I believe so. If that's the direction of council, we could definitely implement this now. And then if something comes up that can assist our tenants a little further, staff can work on that.
Certainly, if they're not allowed to open fully and they're still having to be limited in their revenues. So at that point, we would want to be able to go further and see if there's more grant money. Also, I was just wondering, how does Santa Clara County define small businesses? Do they do it as a tier like ours?
So Santa Clara County, the reason the $2.5 million came up, that was their, I guess, qualifications for their loan program. So at the time they were giving out loans to small businesses, and they typically use the number of 2.5 million as their cap. I've seen the number 2.5 million in other applications as well. So that is kind of considered the definition or maximum cap for a small business, and in their eyes. Again, that number can definitely be changed. That was just a starting point for me to work with.
But then again, theirs is a loan. The county's is a loan, which has to be paid back.
That is correct.
Okay.
And also just a quick note that the renter assistance programs usually require the businesses to apply directly, not through the city. So on average, a lot of the state programs are direct to the state.
I see. That would probably involve a lot more work and effort in getting all those documentations in. So this is actually really, I mean, these businesses operate here in Palo Alto, and certainly, it's a benefit to our residents. So we would like to see them remain if possible, right? So I think the rent program is the right way to go. I agree. I would be, option 2 would be the better option, even though it does involve a little bit more work, but I think there's a lot of fiscal responsibility in there in terms of looking at, making sure that we are doing the right thing. Okay, so thank you for the report. And is there any other comments? Staff or council members? If there isn't, then I'm looking for a motion. I'll move it. Can I get a second? I'll move the staff report.
Councilmember Koo, if you could specify which option in the staff report recommendation, that would be helpful.
Thank you. I'll move option number 2 in the staff report for rent forgiveness. And that would be rent forgiveness using a COVID-19 impact approach. Can I get a second? Thank you. Ms. Kang, will you call for the vote?
Actually, Sorry,
I'm
Chair.
sorry.
I had my hand raised. I don't know if you could see it though or not.
I didn't have my thing up. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Councilmember Tanaka.
Sure, no problem. So, I realize this might be hard to administer, but I just wonder whether we should try to factor in, the percentage of Palo Alto in option 2. I think option 2 is better than option 1, but I just feel that there might be some organizations have greater good for the community than others, and we should look at that to make it more fair.
So do you want to rank that, or did you want to collect the information as Mr. Weaver had mentioned?
I think we should collect it, and I think that should be one of the factors in terms of looking at the COVID-19 impact. This like community impact. Like if there's one which certain Palo Alto people, and I realize maybe some of them wouldn't have this information. Maybe they have no idea where people are. Then they're just kind of unknown. But I think that would be important to try to make sure that we maximize the good that we do for our community.
Councilmember Tanaka, if I could ask, if you could specify what specifically in terms of that information would do to change the allocation of the funds?
Sure. So basically a priority, right? So basically the ones that have greater good get more dollars, and the ones that have less percentage of Palo Alto get less dollars.
I guess to what extent though? So with a 3-month cap, with a 6-month cap, with
I think the same approach that option 2 is right now. It's just prioritizing the dollars, because you said like 500 whatever something $1,000 left. So basically, so rather than just treating all of them the same, because some of them actually have a bigger impact for our city than others, trying to focus on the ones that actually have bigger impacts.
So Councilmember Tanaka, if that's the case, then if like you said, there are tenants who may not have that information, who doesn't ask their ask their customers for these questions, it would be somewhat difficult to help them then at that point.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think we could maybe put those in a separate bucket. But I do understand the added complexity here. I'm just trying to think of how to make the limited dollars we have go for. And I think there are some organizations that do a lot more for the community than others. And so that's the intent.
Councilmember, I think correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Weaver, the allocations in option 1 and 2, we do believe that we would be able to satisfy the needs or the limits essentially established by those for all of our current tenants that we've listed. So we're not at a point, staff hasn't brought forward options for the committee's consideration that would run out essentially in terms of the amount of funding for the current tenants that the city has. So I guess I understand the desire to obtain the information, but in light of the desire to, create that benefit and create it in a quick fashion, it seems like what you're asking for would require staff actually to come back with that information and any impacts of it and a potential additional revision to the program. Whereas right now, these programs can satisfy up to 3 months for all the tenants that we've identified.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should do that. I mean, how many people total are we talking about?
I would have to ask Mr. Weaver.
So are you asking for how many tenants that would be helped by just the initial program that we're looking at now?
Yeah.
So the number that we're looking at now, we have about 38 tenants that we're looking at. It could be more depending on those who do not qualify for the nonprofit. I do hesitate regarding using the information collected for residents as a criteria, just due to the fact that if I can't get a defined number initially, it's just going to be a little tough because, again, using a percentage, if you can only serve, let's say, 5 residents due to the restrictions, and 4 out of the 5 is 80%, whereas maybe someone else who can accommodate 100, but they only have, let's say,
Oh, I see. So maybe the absolute number is important too. So maybe rather than solve it here, we say, well, we try to get the absolute number, which would give us a percentage. And then when this goes back to council, the council as a whole could look at this and see, like, maybe we just do option 2 as it is, or maybe we find that, no, maybe some of these we want to give a lot more to, or give more months of forgiveness than others. Maybe that's the way we could solve this. So we could still move fast. We could, if the ones that can tell of the 38, the ones that can tell us, before this hits council, that way on council we could have more information and really see whether it makes sense to do this or not. Maybe all of them we have no idea, and then it doesn't matter. But or maybe we find out most of them we do know, and then we can make a better decision on council then.
Yeah, and also too, just to consider on the list is we have artists in there as well. So to try to quantify, let's say, the number of paintings or murals or things.
Well, not painting murals. Just do they? I mean, do those artists live here, or are they somewhere else, right?
It also depends on the customer. If I would say it would probably be best if we collect this information and consider it for future use, but just trying to have this and come back. I mean, I can ask and try to collect information, but I worry that some of our small businesses are relatively tiny, so it'd be hard for them to either dig up past information and try to define a period to make this work. Just my thoughts there.
Okay. Anyway, I think you guys know what I'm trying to do, which is I'm just trying to figure out how do we make it goal for our community.
Right, and I actually agree that collecting the information from those who can provide is one thing, and it's the right thing to do also. However, there are businesses that are mom and pops. Sometimes it's just a mom or just a pop, and they're going to be having just a handful of clients or customers. So I would be worried that they would be left behind just because of that and left out of this program.
So what about we just collect information for the people we can by council, and then we leave up to council to decide. I mean, maybe we do nothing but option 2. But so we just make the request for information. If they can provide it, awesome. If they can't, okay, we just don't get it, right? And then so we can decide what it looks like.
We're just collecting the information for future use, but we're still going to, but we still go through with this program, so that it's recommended to council on the consent calendar.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. If it goes to consent calendar, that's a good question. Well, that's it. It's fine to go to a consent calendar because if we see the information and we think there's some dramatic thing, we can always try to pull it. So I think that's fine too. But I think making the ask for the information and presenting it in the consent item is probably a good thing. And the consent item could be the deadline to actually get the information.
Ms. Nose?
Point of clarification, the actual referral from the council is to obtain a program, a recommended program from the Policy and Services Committee back to the council. So Councilmember Tanaka, staff wouldn't bring back to the full council this information. That would be a component of the program that once council approves that program structure, staff would then go out and do. So I think there's a timing issue that we're talking about here, in the sense of Policy and Services is providing a recommendation to the City Council on what the program would look like, including the qualifications and the information sought.
Okay. So are you saying that this has to go back to council for us to make the recommendation to council to ask for this information? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, essentially, yes. The Policy and Services Committee is reviewing the program options, intended to go into additional detail to kind of hammer out some of these either program qualifications or allocation methodologies. And then that recommendation from this committee will come back to the full council body for them to ultimately take the action. So in order to execute what it sounds like you are trying to discuss, what would happen is we would bring all this information back to the full City Council. Then City Council would have to direct staff to, again, go get this information before administering a program, come back with the additional information, and then do an additional, distribute the funds. So I just want to be clear in terms of what our authorities are essentially, and what the impacts will be on the timing of this.
And I think there's a certain degree of urgency for those tenants that are perhaps feeling pressured. Even though city might not be pressuring them, but then a lot of business owners have that over their heads, and I'm sure there is a certain amount of pressure. So Ms. Noze, can I ask if we add what Councilmember Tanaka wants to this? Of course, we're recommending, and if council just approves it, then would the program be able to conduct the rent forgiveness and then at the same time start collecting the information? Can it be worked that way?
If this was structured as you had referred to earlier, as one of the tenets of the program is that we seek this information as part of the application, but it not be used as an eligibility criteria for receipt of the funds, we could proceed as staff. However, if the intent is to collect the information and then come back with that information to determine allocation of the funds, then no, staff would have to go survey the tenants, get that additional data, bring a report back to council or policy and services at the council's pleasure for a distinguishment of how to allocate those funds.
Chair Kuv, I'm kind of, if I may jump in, I would say I'm not comfortable using this as a criteria for selecting businesses to be able to qualify for rent forgiveness, and I'm cautious of the precedent that this creates. If we're collecting this information, I think it's unfair to then collect this information if we're not going to then collect this information of all businesses within the city. And I don't really understand what would the desire be to just have this information for these very few select businesses and not all others. So if this was a recommendation, if we were creating a business registry and we wanted to have this information, I would think that would be very, very relevant. But for the limited purposes here, I don't understand the relevance of it. And what I'm getting from staff is definitely some kind of concern of how this would be, of how we would implement this and the timeliness of it. So I think this is something that is very timely, as you mentioned, Chair Koo, and I think anything that gets in the way of being able to provide that relief, we should not be pursuing at this time.
Well, then it's pretty clear what we need to do then, right? You just have to go with this motion.
But I appreciate Councilmember Tanaka, I think kind of your thoughts and intent behind it. I just don't support it for these purposes.
Okay.
Okay, so shall we call the vote, or is there any other comments? Okay, so Ms. Kang, will you call the vote?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Chair Koo,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
This
Thank you.
motion passed.
Okay, thank you so much. And now on to our item number 3, which is discussion and recommendation to council on referring investigations of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation by police officers to the independent police auditor. Do we have a presentation? I think we do.
Yes, a very short presentation. Good evening, everyone. Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. So I'll be making this presentation very briefly, and we have staff support with us today from the Attorney's Office, Human Resources, as well as the Police Department for questions. Just 2 quick slides. So the direction provided by the City Council in November, we have a lot of different efforts going on related to our race and equity work, a lot of which are focused on the Police Department. I wanted to just take a moment to summarize some of the items that Council did in relation to the independent police auditor in November. So expanding the scope of the independent police auditor review to include supervisory inquiry investigations, which were formerly referred to as IIRs, or informal inquiry reports. Also expanding the review to include uses of force resulting in injury requiring medical attention. And some examples were given there, such as firearm, canine, baton use, physical strength, and so on. Also adding that the IPA would publish 2 reports per year on a set schedule, which is a little bit different than the previous system used related to the IPA reports. Looking at the IPA appearing before council 2 times a year, and also giving the city council the ability to ask the IPA for performance reviews in specific topic areas. So the city attorney has been actively working on that contract amendment. It's in process, and we're anticipating that it will come to the city council for approval before the summer break. The new scope would be implemented in the next IPA report, which would be after the summer break. And as you recall, the most recent IPA report went to the city council as an informational memo on March 22nd. So the item that is before you this evening, one of the other directives that came from the city council's work in November, on November 16, 2020, with our long list of items related to race and equity, was for the Policy and Services Committee to consider whether the IPA should review city investigations of employee harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. And so that is the item that is before you today. We offer a few options here for the council to consider, or for the committee to consider, as possible pathways forward on this topic. And so I'll just list them here. The first being direct staff to research reporting options and return to the committee. There has been some information that we have found in terms of the reporting format for this recommendation, and we think that it may be beneficial for us to do a couple comparisons of other communities, just to make sure that the way it's reported for a smaller department such as ours is one that actually maintains the anonymity that would be needed for those reporting. The second option is recommending that the council add the scope to the IPA using existing reporting practices. And the third would be recommend that the council defer additional new scope pending implementation of the scope on the previous slide that I mentioned, with all the other pieces happening with the IPA. So these are just some ideas that we wanted to offer as options for the committee to consider on this topic of expanding review for the IPA's work to these internal employee investigations. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chair Koo, and we are available to answer questions. Thank you.
So before I go to public, I thought this was going to be a little bit more of a robust study rather than defer it to another day by to collect information. So I'm a little bit surprised. I thought for sure even Mr. Janako was going to be here tonight so that we can ask him questions. But it doesn't seem like he's here, and it's another gathering direction. So I'm a little bit surprised by that. I guess I thought we'd have more of a robust discussion tonight. Was it just because we were not ready to do this, or?
If I might jump in, I do think, Chair and members of the committee, it's within your prerogative to give us direction tonight if you would like to. So perhaps at the risk of restating what Deputy City Manager Cotton Gaines suggested, is a range of options, including act tonight or conduct further review or gather additional information if you'd like. So I think you're free to do any of those options.
Right, because our agenda item actually states Policy and Services Committee should discuss and make a recommendation to council on whether city investigations of uniformed officers arising from internal complaints, and on. But the recommendations that was just presented in slide 2 is slightly different from what we have here. So I do have, based on the recommendation in the staff report that I received, I was expecting to have recommendations on what to take to council, not to have to come back and based on the recommendations that was there, that Ms. Gaines had provided.
Sure.
So I just want to register that, and if my colleagues have any comments, they can do it now, or we can go to a public. But I have to say that I am disappointed about this. Do you have any comments, colleagues?
I think you said it right. I concur with the chair's comments.
Okay.
Well, I would say that definitely as chair, you have your prerogative. You could continue this item, or in fact, in the future, if you think that the staff reports aren't ready, you could push back on staff to make sure it's in a state that's appropriate. Because I do think we want to use our time effectively, and if we're not quite ready for it, I think this item should probably not even be heard or agendized. So I would definitely encourage you to use your prerogative to do that. So I mean, if you want, we could continue this item to a date when staff thinks that they'll be ready for this.
We'll go through with what Ms. Gaines has, and we can, based on the staff report that we have received, we can ask the questions if you have questions prepared. I know I did have questions prepared for Mr. Giannaco, thinking that he was going to be here. But we'll do the best tonight, and then review again the recommendations that was on slide 2 and go from there. Anyway, we'll go to a public now. Ms. King.
Yes, of course. If anyone from the public would like to speak on this agenda item, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press star 9. We first have Mr. Aram James. Aram, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes for public comment.
Okay, Councilmember Koo, you're right on point tonight. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm able to hear you.
Back in November, when we had a meeting with the police chief, he did not feel like every time a gun was pulled should be recorded and that data point captured. The following day, Mike Giannaco, and this is why I think your point that Mr. Giannaco be here is critical, in his report to the Board of Supervisors, he said recommendation number 5, the sheriff's office should add to its force reporting policies a requirement that personnel write any observation. I'm sorry, I apologize. Number 6, the sheriff's office should consider adding to its force reporting policies a requirement that deputies report as a use of force anytime they point a firearm at an individual. And they made the point, I should say, Mr. Giannaco, that this is an important data point regarding race. How often is a weapon pulled on a black person, a brown person as an Asian person? So it's a data point, and this is something that the chief said, no, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't something that was important. So I think it's absolutely critical to have Mr. Giannaco here. And by the way, we wouldn't be expanding the scope of the IPA if we were to cover internal matters. We took that away, and we did it. I named it the Perone Amendment because we covered up and continue to that it wasn't a private personnel matter. Anytime there's an attack by a white officer allegedly on a black officer who is then driven from the department, this is a very quintessentially public matter. We need to make certain that we put back that the internal matters of this nature are not really internal. Who characterizes that? And so my question is, let's bring that back and let's make certain that we expand the scope to include internal complaints, particularly when they involve such critical matters. Right now, we know this country, policing is at a crisis point. We're starting to even reconsider defunding. Maybe not in Palo Alto, but maybe. It's a very critical time. And yes, it was a discretionary act in 2006 to have Palo Alto have an independent police auditor, as the report points out. Not every small city does, and it's up to the city to do. But why was that? It's because we had a broken police department back in 2006, and we still have a broken police department. If we're going to have transparency, we want to use the IPA to the fullest scope. Mr. Jananko should be here. He can tell you what other departments are doing and what's the best practices here. So it's absolutely, I'm with you 100%, Councilmember Koo. Let's bring Mike Jananko in so that the appropriate questions can be asked. Thank you all tonight for letting me speak on this issue.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason M. Oh, it seems that Jason just lowered his hand. Our next speaker is, oh, Jason raised his hand again. Is Jason M, followed by Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg, and then the dial-in number. I'm sorry, it seems, Jason, are you ready for public comment?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is Jason Miles, volunteer chair for the ACLU of the Mid-Peninsula. I'm calling out of Palo Alto. I've recently had the opportunity to speak with some former and current Palo Alto residents, and I have distilled their comments for the submission. For good reason, incarcerated persons do not get to make their own rules in jail, as when an entity, any entity, can police, investigate, and codify their conduct, there's plenty of potential for abuse. In this regard, while members of the community appreciate last November's expansion in scope, the community is disheartened that the expansion, as well as other provisions, weren't installed to begin with, and this seems purposeful. Residents are skeptical of outsourcing policy suggestions, especially to a firm that may not have staff with relevant lived experience working on the issues, as doing this allows for the negation of true accountability. Consider that Palo Alto doesn't use an outside mayor, city manager, or city council to make local decisions. Such heavy reliance on an outside firm seems out of touch, and as one resident put it, frivolous. In closing, members of your community, especially the most impacted members, understand that they are absent of sufficient power and voice, as they must rely on you to realize their requests. This has been the case for as long as they can remember. Those members are looking forward to a self-determined tomorrow, and they are currently learning from your actions today. I want to thank you for your time, but since I have some time left, I want to agree with Mr. Aram James. I agree, Councilmember Koo is on point tonight, as she oftentimes is. And I always love listening to Rebecca Eisenberg speak. They make the council meetings more exciting and more authentic. Thank you all for your time. Please have a great week.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg, followed by our dial-in caller. Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg, if you can unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes for public comment.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. First of all, to Jason, thanks so much. In fact, will you contact me? I've been wanting to get in touch with the ACLU about a couple things. But also, I want to say I appreciate and I'm grateful for the words of Aram James, and of course for Jason, the previous speaker. I think that we're all really aligned here in what we're seeking. I want to do what I do, which is kind of getting to the brass tacks in this limited time. And what I urge you to do is you are ready, you have everything you need to know to refer this on to the police independent auditor. And in this case, we need an independent auditor because the police cannot be expected to audit themselves. They just do not do that. That is just known to fail. So although I oppose the external auditor for the issues that were discussed in number 1, here the police need an independent auditor because the police have been behaving badly. They don't share their bad acts. It took a year for any of us to find out about the dog mauling, and lo and behold, we see 10 videos about what these police officers did, and it wasn't good. All of these items need to be referred. I take actually great umbrage, extreme offense at the report that was given to you. As you know, I'm an employment lawyer. As you know, I have an expertise in gender discrimination. As you know, I'm actually the local expert for several TV shows about Title VII and Title IX, sexual discrimination and harassment, and also related racial discrimination and harassment in workplaces. And it is unheard of that these items would not be reviewed by an external committee. It's kind of like letting the cats review their actions about whether they treated the mice appropriately. There needs to be a place that an employee who was raped, an employee who was harassed, an employee who was discriminated outside the workplace, there needs to be a place, not just their bosses, to go for assistance. I have heard numerous complaints from former police officers and from actually some current and former members of city council staff, the city staff, who have complained about hostile workplace environments and sexual harassment, and in some cases, sexual assault. And this needs to be referred. It always needs to be referred. Our police department has a record of bad acts. This is not private information. If you want, you can look and see how the reports are handled for the school district, which actually does implicate children and very confidential information. Every single Title IX report is logged. It is logged without names, but the nature of it is logged. And then the status of it is logged. I'm just about done. The status of it is logged. Please let me finish this last line. It's my birthday, and I care enough about this to call in. There is very, very easy to share reporting about these events without sharing personal information. I urge you to pass this to the independent auditor, because these people are suffering and they can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is the dial-in caller ending in 917. If you can unmute yourself, you will have 3 minutes on the timer for public comment.
Yes, it's Winter Dellenbach again. Thank you for dealing with this item. Yes, do bring this back. I agree with Chairperson Koo on that. And of course, IPA Michael Giannacco should be here. He would be very informative and very helpful to you on this. Yes, please do that. I hope you had a chance, the three members of Policy and Services, to read my memo that I sent. I strongly support our independent police auditor having this increased oversight. I support his reports being of the sort he writes now and being released, as now happens, to the City Council and the public. I think that's extremely important. My support is because it increases both our public safety and the police by allowing an independent check on possible misconduct by officers toward other officers. I think we have to remember what it is we're really talking about. These are internal complaints by officers, sometimes on other officers, and having an independent oversight of that, it can be very helpful to those complainants. Let's keep that in mind. It allows having the IPA allows transparency and accountability to our elected officials and the public. This is as it should be. Police confidentiality, anonymity, and rights can and would be protected by the IPA, as he has done for 15 years. When dealing with police cases, which he deals with police cases all the time, dealing with police, which may include multiple parties, witnesses, and multiple police. Never once has he breached confidentiality in 15 years. Never once. When police names come out, it's because possibly the DA is considering charging with crimes, civil lawsuits, things like that, but never from the IPA. Contrast that to HR with its hidden dark cave process that is a total blackout with no information or accountability to our city council or the public. This is not how the PAPD is going to build trust with the city or the public. Having IPA oversight would also better protect police when they file a complaint, as I was saying. Our IPA is a Stanford Law School graduate who has worked as our IPA for 15 years and is perfectly capable, for goodness sakes, of dealing with this expanded remit before you tonight. Please give him oversight and allow his reporting, as he does now, to the council and the public in the name of increased safety, building trust, and supporting the police and the public. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have no other speakers, Chair Koo.
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo. And yeah, thanks to all the speakers tonight. And in particular, happy birthday, Rebecca. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on your special day. I would say if it was my birthday, I don't know if I would choose to do so, but I'm glad you did. So thank you for your advocacy. So I have a few questions. Are there any examples? Are there any examples of our IPA being unable to maintain the complainant or the witness's confidentiality on sensitive matters? I heard Ms. Dallenbach talk about that. I would like to know if staff can confirm that.
Molly, would you be able to address that one?
So what I can say is that there have been situations when the police officers collective bargaining representative, the Police Officers Association, has raised significant concerns about that with respect to a draft, which then later was adjusted, is my understanding. So there was a period of time when there were a series of communications like that. This was a number of years ago. It's certainly the case that the IPA is very aware of the state law requirements, and that's long been acknowledged in our contract with him. And I agree that the IPA would never identify an officer by name for that reason. The issue that's touched on in the staff report is more complex than that and more subtle. It really involves the dynamic that's created when you have a pretty small department where you have many assignments that are single assignments, or there are only a very few people who have those kinds of assignments. And a detailed reporting can, in context, altogether with other information about the assignments that officers serve in and those kinds of things, can actually lead to sort of putting the pieces together to create a concern that there is an ability to identify. And that has been something that officers have raised through their union in the past in a very strong way.
Okay, thank you. And is staff aware? I mean, I understand in kind of the recommendation, one of the recommendations is for staff to go out and research some of these best practices and better understand how we can address that reasonable concern, given it's a small department. Does staff have any idea on some of those examples right now, or is that just required? Do we just need more research on that?
Well, I think, we did some informal look at this when this came up, I don't know, 18 months ago. And at that time, council decided not to move forward with this scope. And there were some examples on the IPA's own website of work that he's done for other jurisdictions that, we didn't look systematically at it, but there was some material there. We know that there are also other cities that use a much different reporting format, such as the city of San Jose. Dr. Ladores Cordell and the city manager and I had a conversation again, maybe two years ago, and we looked at that document. Dr. Cordell, of course, was the police auditor in San Jose, and they use a much more a table format that has really topic and no detail. So we haven't done any systematic research beyond that, and we offered that as something that if the committee or the full council is interested in a more systematic review, that's some work that we could do to supplement what you've got.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I am concerned about the sensitive nature of these type of complaints and really concerned about the potential chilling effect. And I'd like to kind of know if staff is that kind of the primary concern here, the chilling effect that victims of workplace harassment and discrimination might feel if they know the reporting will automatically be included in the IPA's report. So one, if staff can kind of confirm, is that really the concern here? And is there a mechanism that we can use, and this likely requires that additional research, but is there a mechanism we can use in order to maybe provide discretion to the reporting party to have their case analyzed by the IPA, or at the very least for the reporting party to choose to keep personal identifiable information private within the IPA's report, which seems like it already is, but just trying to better understand how can we balance the concern of wanting to make sure that we have greater oversight over the police department, while also making sure that we're not having what I do think is a reasonable concern of a chilling effect on victims wanting to come forward.
Sure, I perhaps comment on that. I do think, Councilmember Stone, you raise very much so a valid issue, and certainly one important dimension of consideration going forward. The other, quite frankly, is from a supervisory perspective as well. As council members know, in any organization, there is the potential for claims to be raised, and that can also have, quite frankly, a chilling effect on supervision. And so it's clearly a balancing act, and while always wanting to respect and protect the rights of anyone who feels that they are a victim, it also, we know that there are situations in which claims can be raised many times. So the real issue, to your point, I do think comes down to a question of the level of narrative that is provided. If it is the committee's recommendation that we proceed, and again, as the council has seen, and perhaps follow-up that might be of value would be to provide a few differing examples from different agencies that show the range from the very descriptive narrative that the Palo Alto practice has been to the tabular format that City Attorney Stump pointed out.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, and definitely where I'm going, which would be to include this within the scope of the IPA, but researching what are those best practices to make sure we can find that balance. And it's good to hear that there are other departments and other IPAs that do this work, and so I think that would be worth coming back to us to better understand that. A few more questions then, and this kind of goes now into sort of because we got to see the different harassment policies, the city's anti-harassment policy and the police department's discrimination harassment policy. And I really appreciated the clear language in the city's anti-harassment policy that makes clear that the policy is focused on the interpretation of the victim and not the intent of the harasser. I think that's the way to go. But why doesn't the police department's discrimination harassment policy not have such a clear language? I mean, I was really concerned reading the distinctions between the two policies, and it was just so clear how strong the city's is, and frankly how weak the police department's is.
So I bet HR Director Rumi Portillo will have some comments, but let me just jump in and say that both of those policies apply to uniformed officers in our police department.
Good. Okay, good to know. So, and does the city's reign supreme over the departments where it's weaker?
Yes.
Okay.
Rumi, do you have anything to add?
Oh, that's correct. You're exactly right, Molly, on that, Attorney Stump. The policies do apply to all employees, and we would evaluate violations on either policy. So, and both.
And our police officers, because I saw at the end of the police department's harassment policy talks about kind of the process in which new recruits and officers frequently have to I guess reread and understand the policy. Is that the same case with the city's anti-harassment policy? that police officers have to be aware and knowledgeable of both?
I actually have to defer to Chief Bender on that to see whether that is part of an annual process within the department.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Stone. Yeah, that is. So we will go over as part of the training program for a new trainee that's coming on, a recruit. They will be versed and trained on both policies, both the PD specific and the city. And just to confirm what others have said, they are held to both.
Thank you for that. Two more questions, if I may, Chair Koo. So
Yes, please go ahead, Councilmember Stone.
thank you. So I guess this is more for Molly. So under the police department's discrimination harassment policy, sexual harassment appears to only include incidents that are related to either the harassment being contingent on the basis of employment decisions, or when the contact has the on employment decisions, or when the conduct has the purpose or effect of substantially interfering with a member's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. It seems like I mean, the way that's worded seems like a pretty kind of onerous burden in kind of the real life implication of that policy. Try to think how to kind of phrase this as a question. How does that kind of play out in real life? Because it's that language of substantially interfering with a member's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. Just seems like a hard one to kind of to prove. And is that interfering with these matters being able to be resolved, or does that end up just kind of leading to a bunch of roadblocks in the processes?
Those are great questions. And so we can geek out a little bit here on the law. So the language that you just read maps on to Title VII and the Fair Employment and Housing Act, and it's what's required to prove civil liability in court. The better practice for employers is the practice that's reflected in the citywide policy, which is that you don't set the bar so high, because as an employer, our obligation and our desire in order to be a good employer that fosters the positive work environment and growth and success of all of our employees is we want to identify and remedy situations that may be inappropriate, that don't yet meet the pretty high bar to establish civil liability. So that broader language that you focused on in the citywide policy does that. And that's how the Human Resources Department approaches these issues. So for example, the HR department could, if there was an incident that from a civil liability standpoint is considered relatively minor and would not allow a plaintiff to establish their case, but it is inappropriate in terms of sexual harassment, racial conduct, religion, et cetera, then the HR department will issue a finding of sustained on a complaint like that and remedy it because it violates our policy. And that is considered to be an employer best practice. And it allows us to then not get to the point where we have a work environment that actually does create civil liability. And then all of the really unfortunate kind of employment and management type of dynamics that result in a situation like that. So the idea is to catch it early at a much lower level.
Okay, good. And yeah, always nice to kind of geek out on the law a little bit, because I was reading that, thinking about that distinction. It just makes me wonder, why is it? And I understand, Assistant Chief Bender, I appreciate that both policies that officers are trained on both policies. I'm concerned, though, that I'm sure there's a tendency for people within a particular department to focus on the policies of their department. And so I'm just kind of concerned about and confused, why do we have two separate policies?
Yeah, so Chief Bender can speak to this, but the police department has a baseline set of activity with a firm called Lexipol, which is really, they're drafting generic good policies for small police departments all around the country. And I suspect that this is the Lexipol policy on this issue. Now, we have the ability to customize our policies, and many Palo Alto Police Department policies are customized, and we can raise the bar. And so Chief Bender can speak to it. Maybe this is the question just of emphasizing to officers that the city's policy is more strict in this area.
No, Molly, Attorney Stump, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And we do fall back on the city's policy because Lexipol is, our policy provider for all police related matters in the PD. So our employees are well aware of the city policies and know that they're held accountable for them.
Thank you. And I just got one more question and point. Thank you to my colleagues for being patient. Another area of concern I have is that the only non-police personnel an officer can contact regarding claims of discrimination, retaliation, or harassment is the city manager. But now understanding that the city policy applies to the police department as well, maybe this is not the case. So Molly, if you can kind of correct me.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering why not make the process as simple as opening up the city's anti-harassment policy and allowing for reporting to any supervisor or manager within or outside of the department. So is that the case?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So a police officer with a concern can go to the Human Resources Department. They can come to my office. They can go to any manager. Okay,
great. And so I know it's not really within the kind of purview of what we're discussing tonight, but I do think this is something that, yeah, I understand why the police department's policies are different, and that kind of boilerplate language. I understand how we got there, but it seems like there's definitely areas where we can clean up, especially where the city's policies are far more robust, to just make that clear. Because again, I do think there's a tendency to focus on the policies within your department and maybe not review as closely what maybe the city's better written policies are. But so thank you for those clarifications. Those are all the questions for me, Chair.
Thank you, and thanks to the host for muting me when my dog started making noise. But Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any questions?
I did actually, but Councilmember Stone actually asked a few of them already, so I'm okay right now. But I would be interested in knowing whether you guys want to do in terms of whether we should continue this so we could get some of our questions answered from maybe people who aren't here today. So that's something I would like to know, but I'll let you talk about your thoughts first.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I wanted to ask in the forms of harassment, right? It gets pretty tough when, say for example, verbal harassment, there are times that it could just be friendliness and a joke. And in some ways, at some point, it can be taken to be harassment. So how does that line get drawn? Or is it just told to the employees, based on this policy, be aware that even joking can become something different, and there might be charges or complaints filed and grievances, so forth. I mean, it's that line is very fine.
Perhaps I'd ask our Chief People Officer to respond to that.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. Chair Koo, the way that I would respond to that is that through our training that we do with our workforce, and this may also help with Councilmember Stone's question about the city policy versus the police policy, we do conduct training for the workforce every other year. And it is based on the city's policy, which is the stronger policy that was being discussed. And what is trained is that it is how the receiver accepts the information. So if someone is joking and they mean no harm, but it's received in a way that feels offensive, then that meets the standard already. And we spend quite a bit of time in our Human Resources office, and we do have trained investigators, and we have trained personnel in our HR staff to conduct consultations with employees to help identify behavior, because sometimes they will contact our office saying exactly as you were, the situation you were laying out, where they're unsure. And so we have consultation available to employees. We also spend a considerable amount of time doing smaller trainings to work groups, supervisors, and work units to have them understand what a respectful workplace needs to look like. And if there's any questions around the kind of behavior that isn't acceptable, then we are a resource to assist with that. So we do train to this. It's in our policy, and we do both proactive and responsive actions to enforce and support the policies for a respectful workplace.
Thank you for that. I mean, I can certainly understand. It's really difficult. I'll give an example. Is had a couple of colleagues. One colleague said, "Hey, girl, you made it," and this is a friend colleague. Then another friend, another colleague, not a friend, standing nearby, say, "Hey, yeah, you girl, you made it." And so, here's somebody I like and a friend. So how I take it personally, calling me girl is okay. But then I shift to the other person who is not really a friend. And because they said that, then I could kind of report it. So when you say it's how you personally take it, it's actually, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy task for HR and, to kind of, or for the, for whoever is going to be in charge to take that complaint and kind of decipher where it is coming from. The other thing on these kind of issues, when it's in the police department, does it get reported to the city manager or does it go into the supervisor at the police department?
When it comes
or to you?
Yeah, and when it comes to harassment, discrimination, and retaliation or hostile work environment, employees are not restricted to one path. So we want to provide as many avenues as possible. So this is one policy that does not require an employee to follow the chain of command. The chain of command is a very strong principle in the police department and in the fire department in particular. But when it comes to these matters, the training that is provided to all employees and supervisors clarifies that they may come to any supervisor, any manager, any department, but in particular, we do encourage them to come to Human Resources or the city manager's office. So in other words, we're not restricting them to go to report to their supervisor and try to work through that path. What we find often is that the conflict may be between the employee and their supervisor anyway. And so if that's the case, we want to make sure that there are other avenues for employees to pursue a concern.
And this is within the PD too?
That is correct, yes.
So on the policy and procedures, the complaint, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not the complaint, it's the procedures for policy implementation, the last one, E, where Human Resources Director's responsibility, where you're responsible for investigating all complaints of harassment or for hiring an outside investigator to investigate. When does that happen?
It's on a case-by-case basis. What we take a look at is, what are the circumstances? Are there any conflicts by having internal staff conduct the investigation? We very frequently use outside investigators. We often use licensed private investigators, or we use attorney investigator firms, but we also do have trained investigators on our staff. So it really is a matter of what the circumstance is in front of us, and also timeliness. What happens is that very often when we contact a firm, they may not be available. Sometimes it takes weeks because they are as a backlog often with investigators to be able to start a case. And so we weigh the timeliness, the particular circumstances, relationships within the department, any kind of history that might be there, any kind of pre-work that might have happened. For example, if we've had grievances or past issues, who worked on those investigations and that type of thing. So we do a triage anytime a complaint comes in, and we make a determination on what's the most effective way to have the case handled.
Okay, so no set procedure for when that line comes up, and when the grievance is to a certain heightened degree, that you would go out and get outside investigators.
Yes, there are times when a case will come in and it will be very obvious that it's going to be an outside firm, and that it would not be, the best for the city to take on the case. There are other times when there may be a lower level complaint that appears to be a misunderstanding, and there are times when we can facilitate the situation or provide training as we're going through the process. And a lot of times on complaints like this, there's resulting training that comes of it, and there is some sort of resolution that we're seeking to try to have the parties come together. But that's not always that's not always known on the front end, and so when we often lean towards an external investigator more often than not.
Okay. So some of the alternative reporting for harassment and retaliation is, some of the state and county, all those agencies that were listed, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, and some other ones. But I was just wondering, does that add a layer of difficulty for employees to file a complaint? Because I haven't filed anything through these organizations, but would it be like you have to gather a whole bunch of paperwork and you have to produce the proof, and I don't know how intensive it is, and does that set a barrier for reporting because it adds such a huge layer of work for the employee?
The external cases are not that frequent. However, I don't think it's because it's an onerous process. My understanding is that they are very encouraging and welcoming for persons who feel that they've been harassed or discriminated or are in a hostile work environment. There are a lot of there's a lot of streamlined processes and that type of thing where a statement is taken, or there's multiple avenues where they can either call in, write in, email in. And so and the forms that I see that are returned are fairly simplified. They don't look that burdensome. And so, but it is something where I think often persons will go to an outside or agency like that when they've exhausted what they can do within their own. A lot of times, employees will want to seek an internal remedy because they don't want to escalate it. And sometimes the process requires that to have some internal attempts.
If I might note, the council has occasionally seen these come across, whether it be through our own employees or through nonprofits that we work with that, again, have raised issues and have gone to these external agencies as a means of seeking some relief.
So thank you for that. It helps me understand, those are processes that I haven't gone through. So I'm not knowledgeable whether how onerous it is. But what I find throughout the past matters that have come up is that time is something that seems, between that incident to when we know about it, it just seems to be really long. And there has to be a method in being more timely in its reporting out. I realize that there needs to be investigations and, going back and forth between complainant and the instigator or
Fact finding effectively.
the findings, right? So, but still, that time is fairly long, and not knowing the process completely for not only myself but also for the general public, it might cause the questions that they're coming back with. I'll hold because I see a hand, and I'll finish. Well, I'm actually finished. So, Councilmember Stone.
Well, if you have more, I was going to make a motion, Chair Koo.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I move to direct staff and the IPA to include harassment, retaliation, and discrimination claims within the IPA's scope, and research best practices in other jurisdictions to balance the need for transparency and public oversight of law enforcement while preserving the anonymity of the reporting party and witnesses.
Ms. Kang, are you able to put that up on the screen?
So can I ask,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone, are you, so two options. We could go to council with that as council's recommendation. Ultimately, of course, the full council has to say what it is they want to do with the IPA program. So we could take that to council and bring additional information, or we could come back to the committee. What's the committee's pleasure on that?
And I'm fine with what my colleagues prefer. And so I guess for purposes of making the motion right now, before I get a second, I would say we'd include having it come back to PNS. But if there's a strong preference by my colleagues, I'm fine with it being sent directly to council.
Yes, and Councilmember Stone, if you can briefly review what I've written just to confirm that this accurately captures what you've moved.
I think he wanted to say anonymity of complainants and witnesses.
Correct.
So is that explicitly excluding the accused?
By law, it can't.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yep, include that in there too. So complainants, witnesses, and the accused.
Maybe we say the subject?
Okay,
That's fine.
thanks, sorry. I knew there would be a better term than that.
And I think we're missing what include harassment, retaliation, and discrimination. And I'll speak.
Return to have it return to policy and services. Oh, it's up there. I'm sorry. Okay. I'll second that. Unless I missed Councilmember Tanaka's hand. No.
And should I speak to my motion now?
Yes, please.
Well, I think it's clear we're at a moment in our nation's history where public mistrust of law enforcement is at a high point. And every single day, there's some new tragic story in the news, kind of reminding us of the importance of transparency, especially within law enforcement. When we trust, when we put our trust in people who carry a gun and a badge and the authority of law, there needs to be heightened scrutiny. And I think law enforcement, I think the women and men of law enforcement who enter the profession understand that, and for the most part, embrace that. And so, when that trust is broken between the police and the people that they are sworn to protect, the system fails. And moving towards greater transparency and oversight really only benefits us all. But we also need to balance the oversight with procedures that are not going to create a chilling effect on aggrieved parties or potential witnesses. I think the Me Too movement has really shown the importance of allowing victims to come forward with their stories, and we need to develop a process that will protect the victims and the process. And I believe we can find the balance by really having staff understand our desire for greater transparency and creating that balance, and by researching this issue thoroughly. So that's really the kind of the intent behind the motion.
Councilmember Stone, thank you for the motion. I wanted to ask if we would consider also adding in there that perhaps the police department's policy manual for harassment, discrimination, and retaliation, have it mirror the city's, and also have it mirror the city, since it is the more thorough one.
I think that's probably a little bit outside of your agenda item, but maybe Deputy Manager Gaines can kind of incorporate that into other work that's being done on race and equity policies. Chantal?
Sure. I was thinking the same for what's noticed today, but we hear the point and we will work on that with the police department.
Okay.
So just one procedural note, if I might, Chair, members of the committee. I'm reminded that you have an existing referral to do an IPA contract amendment that will be going directly back to the council between now and June. So I know that there was some openness to whether it come back to the committee or go to the full council. I think it would be efficient if we are able to bring it all together back to the full council at one time.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't know if Councilmember Tanaka. But yeah,
What do you think?
I'm okay with that too.
So we would change then, instead of for Policy and Services Committee, it will go to full council.
And clearly as an action item, not on consent.
Agreed.
And then does that mean we need to change the wording at the end for review and recommendation?
You could pretty much strike everything after subject.
Okay, looks good to me.
One more question to the maker. Do you want to have also staff to research reporting options and return and add it into here to take to council?
That's my understanding of the motion. If staff doesn't think it implies that.
So that's under the best practices?
Yeah, I think that's how we understand research best practice to balance the needs of transparency while preserving anonymity. That's a reference to that, how things will get reported out at what level of detail.
Okay, and all right. Any further comments? Councilmember Tanaka?
No, thank you.
Okay, so can we call the vote, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank
Chair
you.
Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
This motion passed unanimously.
Thank you. So we'll move on to future meetings and agendas. Let me see here.
I can.
Ms. Cotton Gaines?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Ku. So we have for the month of May, a review, tentative right now, a review and discussion of proposed amendments to the tree protection ordinance. Also a public works item related to ADA regulations, and a legislative update and an update on town halls are the 4 items listed for next month's meeting. And I know that you also wanted me to give a brief town hall update today. So whenever we're done talking about future agendas, I can do that.
Okay, and thank you for that. For May, okay, I'll talk to you offline on something else. But please go ahead and give your report, Ms. Gaines.
Sure, thank you. And I apologize if you hear tiny coworkers very loud in my background. So very quickly, I just wanted to let the committee know Ms. Horgan Taylor will be at the committee meeting next month to give a thorough update on the town hall planning. But with the council's adoption of the community and economic recovery plan, staff is finalizing the details on a series of engagement efforts, including 2 town halls for this year. Larger town halls, one is in May on the budget process and another will be in the fall. And then they're also developing a series of neighborhood community meetings similar to town halls planned by neighborhood area. And the first is set to begin in the month of June. So she'll have more information on that. A part of our engagement work is also linked to the new website, which went live last week. So we're finding different ways to engage the public and make sure that we're hearing the public's voices on the different initiatives happening at the city. So if there's any thoughts on information you'd like me to share with Ms. Horgan Taylor for her report next month, please let me know.
Just a question on the smaller community ones, the smaller community town halls, are they going to involve council members?
I believe that's the thought right now, but I'll
Okay.
make sure that she clarifies that in her report to the committee next month.
I think it would be prudent to involve a couple or 3. Okay.
Agreed, absolutely.
Okay. Well,
I like
thank
that
you.
number, just under quorum.
Yeah. Also, the code enforcement audit that Ms. Dallenberg brought up, can you just look into that? When was the last time that was reported out? If there's anything to report, I don't know if that goes under Kyle or Mr. O'Rourke, or is that going to be to city manager's office? But
Right, we'll
if you
coordinate
just
on
take a look
follow-up.
at that. If my colleagues, do you have any more comments? Shake your head, Councilmember Stone. No. Then I am going to call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for tonight. Thank you, Danny.
Thank
Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.